Hey guys, welcome back. I hope you are having an amazing day. Let's get right into the stories. The first one is a pro-revenge story. This happened about 2 years ago, and it's still one of my proudest moments. I was dating this guy, Alex, who was going through a custody battle with his ex-girlfriend over their preschooler. We worked at the same coffee shop with this girl named Sarah. Sarah was an old friend of Alex and had worked with him before. She had also previously worked with the mother of Alex's child, Emma, and everyone was seemingly friends and remaining civil. Or so I thought. Sarah had secretly taken sides and wrote a terrible affidavit lying about Alex. Alex somehow got a copy of it through his lawyer. As I was reading it, I kept getting more and more furious. I hate liars, and one thing I really feel that crosses a boundary is using a child for leverage to hurt the other parent. "Can you believe this?" I asked Alex, pointing at a particularly egregious lie in the affidavit. Alex shook his head, his face a mix of anger and hurt. "I never thought Sarah would do something like this. We've been friends for years." Sarah was knowingly lying under oath and siding with Emma to prevent Alex from parenting his kid, and he was by no means a bad dad. Well, Sarah had enemies that I worked with and had easy access to contact. These enemies had sold Sarah a laptop that she wasn't paying them for. I didn't necessarily like the people who owned the laptop, but the enemy of my enemy is my friend. I called them up and told them I came in peace. "Hey, it's me from the coffee shop. I have some info you might want to hear." "What's this about?" they asked suspiciously. "It's about Sarah and that laptop she owes you for." I asked if they had Sarah's address to get back their laptop. They did not. I passed off Sarah's info and waited for her to call me. Now I was one of two people who could have ratted out the location of the laptop, and when Sarah called me to tell me her laptop got repossessed, she said, "I have no idea who could have done it. It would have either been you or my ex Jake." I tell her casually, "I don't think it was Jake," and I swear up and down she responded with, "Well, who would have done it then?" I held back laughter and finished the conversation with half-hearted, "Oh, I don't know, that's so weird," type comments until she hung up. Alex was next to me in the car, trying to stifle his laughter. "Did she really not figure it out?" he asked, grinning. "Apparently not," I replied, shaking my head in disbelief. Alex won shared custody of his child, and Sarah lost her coffee shop job because she didn't have a laptop to do her online coursework, which was a requirement for her position. To this day, I wonder if she ever pieced together that it was me. I don't like liars. The next one is an entitled people's story. I never thought I'd be writing one of these stories, but here we are. It all started when my new neighbor, let's call her Karen, moved in next door about 6 months ago. At first, everything seemed fine. We exchanged polite hellos over the fence, and I even brought over a welcome basket with some local treats. Little did I know that this seemingly normal interaction would spiral into a ridiculous nightmare. Karen had 2 large dogs, a German Shepherd and a Labrador. Now, I love dogs as much as the next person, but these 2 were something else. They barked constantly, day and night. I tried to be patient, figuring the dogs were just adjusting to their new home. But after a few weeks, it was clear this was their normal behavior. One Saturday morning, I was out in my backyard, enjoying my coffee and the rare peace and quiet. Suddenly, I heard excited barking and the sound of my gate creaking open. Before I knew it, Karen's 2 dogs came bounding into my yard, nearly knocking me over. "What the?" I started to say when Karen appeared at the gate, grinning from ear to ear. "Oh, good morning," she chirped. "I hope you don't mind, but Buddy and Max just love your yard. I thought I'd let them play here for a bit." I was stunned. Who does that? Without even asking? I took a deep breath and tried to stay calm. "Actually, Karen, I do mind," I said firmly. "These are big dogs, and I have a vegetable garden they could easily destroy. Plus, I'm not comfortable with the liability if something were to happen." Karen's smile instantly vanished, replaced by a look of disbelief. "But they're just playing. They won't hurt anything. Don't be such a killjoy." I stood my ground. "I'm sorry, but this is my private property. Please take your dogs home." Grumbling, Karen called her dogs and left. I thought that would be the end of it. Boy, was I wrong. The next day, I came home from work to find Karen's dogs in my yard again. This time, they'd dug up part of my garden and were sprawled out in the mud. I was livid. I marched over to Karen's house and knocked on the door. When she answered, I didn't even give her a chance to speak. "Karen, I told you yesterday that your dogs are not allowed in my yard. Look at the mess they've made. This stops now, or I'll have to report this to animal control." Karen's face turned red. "How dare you threaten my babies? They need space to run and play. Your yard is just sitting there empty most of the time anyway. Stop being so selfish. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. It's my property, Karen. End of discussion. Keep your dogs out of my yard. I turned and walked away, my blood boiling. I installed a lock on my gate that evening, hoping that would solve the problem. It didn't. A few days later, I caught Karen trying to boost her dogs over the fence into my yard. When I confronted her, she claimed they were depressed because they couldn't play in my yard anymore. That's ridiculous, I said. Take them to a dog park if they need more space. My yard is off limits. Karen stomped off, muttering about heartless neighbors under her breath. The next week, things escalated even further. I came home to find animal control parked in front of my house. Confused, I approached the officer. "Good afternoon, sir," the officer said. "We received a complaint about animal cruelty at this address. Mind if I ask you a few questions?" I was floored. Animal cruelty? I don't even have any pets. The officer looked puzzled. The caller said you were denying water and play space to 2 dogs, causing them emotional distress. It took everything in me not to laugh out loud. "Officer, I think I know what this is about. Would you mind coming inside? I have security camera footage I'd like you to see." I led the officer inside and pulled up the footage from the past few weeks on my computer. It clearly showed Karen letting her dogs into my yard without permission, them destroying my garden, and her attempting to get them over the fence. The officer watched the footage, his expression growing more incredulous by the second. "Well," he said finally, "it seems we've been misled about the situation here." Just then, we heard shouting outside. We went to investigate and found Karen in my driveway, yelling at another officer who had just arrived. "There he is!" she shrieked when she saw me. "That's the man who's been abusing my dogs!" The officer I'd been speaking with stepped forward. "Ma'am, I've just reviewed video evidence that shows you trespassing on this man's property with your dogs multiple times. You also filed a false report of animal cruelty. I'm going to have to ask you to come with me to the station to answer some questions." Karen's face went white. But my dogs need the space. He's being cruel by not sharing." The officer wasn't having it. "Ma'am, that's not how private property works. Please come with me." As they led Karen away, I couldn't help but feel a mix of relief and disbelief. How had a simple request to keep dogs out of my yard turned into this? Over the next few weeks, things finally calmed down. Karen was charged with filing a false report and trespassing. She was ordered to pay a fine and attend a course on responsible pet ownership. She also had to pay for the damage to my garden. To my surprise, about a month after the incident, Karen knocked on my door. She looked sheepish and uncomfortable. I wanted to apologize," she said, not quite meeting my eyes. "I was way out of line with everything. I've realized I wasn't being a responsible pet owner or a good neighbor. I'm sorry for all the trouble I caused you." I was taken aback but appreciated the apology. "Thank you, Karen. I accept your apology. I hope we can move forward and be good neighbors from now on." She nodded, looking relieved. "I've enrolled the dogs in obedience classes, and I'm taking them to the dog park every day now. They're much calmer." True to her word, things improved dramatically after that. The dogs' barking reduced significantly, and I never saw them in my yard again. Karen and I aren't best friends or anything, but we've reached a place of mutual respect and peaceful coexistence. Looking back, I'm still amazed at how quickly a simple boundary issue spiraled out of control, but I'm glad I stood my ground and didn't let Karen's entitlement override my right to enjoy my own property. It was a strange and stressful experience, but it taught me the importance of setting clear boundaries and standing up for myself, even in the face of unreasonable demands. So, if you ever find yourself in a similar situation, remember your property, your rules. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise, even if they try to play the "but my dogs need it" card. And hey, maybe invest in some security cameras. You never know when you might need them to prove you're not running some sort of secret dog deprivation scheme in your backyard. The next one is a petty revenge story. My mother never shared the details of her will with me or anyone in the family. When she died, we all learned she had made me executor of her will. My 2 brothers were very upset that their little sister, who has an MBA and a solid family life, was picked over them. Neither of them finished college, and one is an invalid who hasn't left his house in years. Mom left her house to the 2 brothers with the instructions that I sell the house valued at around $250,000 and divide the money between them. All her cash was to be divided between the heirs. Her other property was a small vacation home where her and my dead sister's ashes would be scattered. She left it to me and my dead sister's children. 30 or so years earlier, one of the brothers had told her he wanted to build his own cabin, so she deeded him an adjoining lot. When she died, it was still an empty lot. He convinced one of my nieces to sell him her share of the cabin for $1 and not tell any of the heirs before the paperwork was signed. The only way I found out was because he posted on Facebook, "I'm now a proud partial owner of my family's mountain cabin. According to my lawyer, no one can keep me out of it." We aren't friends on Facebook, but some mutual relatives are, and they alerted me to what had happened. In the state we live in, even a fractional ownership allows the partial owners to enter the property anytime without restrictions. There were some very ugly emails between him and my niece when she tried to get the property back, and he admitted he did this out of spite to hurt me and make sure my family and I didn't get to enjoy the property. Brother number 2 had emailed my niece several times and told her he was so proud of her for selling to her uncle, and he'd never seen his brother so happy. Mom's will was written so that the estate would retain ownership of all property, including real estate, until the probate process was completed. Brother didn't understand that and thought he would have immediate ownership. His lawyer didn't read the will very well and thought the same thing. The only way to get the share of the cabin away from him was for my niece to refuse her share of the inheritance. Even with that, it cost the $600,000 estate, including the house she left to them, roughly $30,000 in attorney fees to fight this. But we won, and the cabin is safe. I don't know how much he had to pay his lawyers, but it was a lot of money. The situation drug on for months. The property Mom had given him sits directly across from the cabin. Out of spite and anger, he clear-cut the property Mom had given him and brought in over 100 tons of gravel, so the wooded area now looks like a gravel parking lot. This is directly next to the place where Mom and sister's ashes are scattered. The brothers had asked for the 3 burial plots next to my dad. They adored and idolized him. Mom is scattered at the cabin and she won't be using them, so I gave them the cemetery plot paperwork. But before probate ended, I had the plots put in my name and they are legally mine now. The paperwork they have is worthless, but they don't know it. I didn't tell the brothers and they won't find out until one of them dies and they can't be buried next to Dad. Honestly, I know Dad wouldn't have approved of what they did. He loved Mom and would be upset her ashes are scattered next to a gravel-covered lot, not the woods she loved. I haven't told them what I've done. Screw them, they wasted money from her estate and made Mom's resting place look horrible. They don't deserve to be buried next to Dad. The next one is a malicious compliance story. So, during this summer, I decided to put my English skills to use at my part-time job. I work at a local tiny cafe on a small city in the middle of nowhere, so I oftenly go around and just say stuff like, "Oh hey, that shirt means this, this, and this." And people are just somewhat surprised and ask me questions about how I know English so well and yada yada yada. The usual European elder people talk. Well, there was this cousin of mine that just used to pass by for a cup of coffee on the way to work. He was very into video games and books and social media. The usual person in the mid-20s if you ask me. So one day he decided to ask me, "Hey, I want to learn English, Sue. Can you help?" And I was like somewhat surprised because nowadays if you want to learn any languages, you just download an app and do daily exercises or just watch movies on that language. That's what I did. I told him just that, but he wasn't satisfied. He said he needs someone to be with him to check on how he evolves on the language. I know my cousin fairly well. We talk daily, so he wasn't shocked when I gave him a pocket face, asked his real reason. He said exactly this. "There is this one English girl that is a poet. She's fine and I want to hook up with her. I have this cool poem for them." I read it. I stood there for 3 minutes in silence. He just wanted to learn the language for a good night. Obviously, I said that it wasn't worth all the work and that he could just let me see the poem and let me translate it. He refused at the start, but then after some back and forths he ended up agreeing, but he agreed in a not-so-thankful tone. He sounded like a damn king sparing the life of a peasant, and he said, "Don't you dare change a thing on the poem, just translate it literally and that's it." Okay, I'll translate it literally just for you since you asked so nicely. Ahem. Your eyes is how the sky blue. Stones brilliance on night starry. I myself ask if you can see the mines, because definitively I can see the yours the day all. The next one is an entitled People's Story. So, I have a short story for everyone. When I discovered this subreddit, this story immediately came rushing back to my mind, and I decided to share it here. This was a few years back, around 2021, when COVID was still a big thing. Trust me, it's relevant. So I have autism and go to a day program for people with mental disorders. It's a community support group, which means we basically go out in the community and do things like shopping, volunteering, etc., in order to get us used to interacting with the outside world. During the height of the pandemic, the support group had downsized it to a one-on-one. A DSP would pick me up from my house and we'd go do something for the day. One of those days I had decided before heading home to get myself some lunch at Amato's. It's a small pizza chain in Maine. I went in by myself as my DSP stayed in her car. I wasn't expecting to be there long, so she felt it was okay for me to go in there by myself. I order my food, grab myself a soda from the fridge, and begin my wait for my order to be done. I doom scroll on Twitter, this was before I left Twitter, to pass the time and keep my mind from wandering to places I don't want it to. Anxiety is fun. All is normal for a bit, but I soon hear someone yelling expletives near the entrance to my right. I turn my head towards the commotion to see our entitled person of the story standing there with two Amato's employees trying to get him out of the building. Said entitled person was an average-looking guy in a black baseball cap, a plain t-shirt, and sweatpants. We shall refer to him as Entitled Man, or EM for short. See, Maine still had a mask mandate in place at the time, and of course EM here decided he didn't have to wear a mask. But you can imagine why having an angry man without a mask on in a place that sells food isn't exactly ideal. But of course EM wasn't about to be told by teenagers he couldn't endanger the public. "I don't have to wear a ducking mask," EM insisted. "Sir, it's store policy," Amato's employee number 1 says. "Shut the duck up! I have a right to not wear a mask," ER snarled. This was so long ago that what happened next is kind of fuzzy, I admit. I do remember there was a lot of cussing, proclamation of his rights, and insistence he didn't need to wear a mask, despite both employees telling him over and over that he did. I should also mention that EM was with what I assume to be his friends, both of whom wear actually masked, believe it or not. One of them taps EM on the shoulder and says, "EM, just wait outside and we'll order." A reasonable request from a friend who just wanted to get their pizza and leave, but naturally not reasonable enough for their belligerent friend to stop verbally abusing the staff. "Duck, no! They can't kick me out, I know my rights," EM insists. "I have a right to not wear a mask." His friends were clearly embarrassed. I remember seeing them look at each other like, "He's gonna get us thrown out, isn't he?" as their friend continued to cause a scene. A few more moments of the two employees and his friends trying to coax him into leaving passed before ER made a discovery that flew him into an even more intense rage. I hadn't mentioned it until now, but both employees were wearing plastic face shields instead of masks. Apparently, during the confrontation, one of the employees had lifted his face shield so it was on top of his head instead of covering his face, and EM apparently objected to this. "You aren't even wearing it right," EM screams without a hint of irony. "You stupid mother ducker! You think you can give me crap over not wearing a mask when you don't even wear yours right? You should be thrown out." I just stood there thinking how insane it was this dude was at once arguing he shouldn't have to wear a mask while criticizing someone else for not wearing one properly. The employees had no response and just went back to trying to lightly nudge him out the door as he continued to curse at them. Eventually, EM had enough and decided to leave, but not before telling everyone he was never coming back here again, calling us all a homophobic slur for wearing masks, and violently slamming the door behind him. An awkward silence followed. No one in there knew what to say or even do, but eventually things returned to normal and orders started being called again, mine being among them. My order finally ready and just wanting to get out of there after that whole ordeal. I left and got into the DSP's car, and as she drove me home I told her all about the whole thing. I remember we shared a laugh and she told me now I have a story to tell people when I got home. The next one is an entitled parent story. What would you have done in this scenario? I'm annoyed. I was shopping at Costco and my blood sugar unexpectedly went low. I'm a type 1 diabetic. I stopped in the Costco eating area for pizza and a smoothie. I'm parked at one of the indoor picnic tables sitting in my wheelchair, but I was clearly using the picnic table. I didn't want to eat messy food over my lap. Space for eating inside of the store is limited and Costco is packed due to it being summer here. Before I know it, a family of 3 comes and sits at my little picnic table. The wife scoffs at me saying I already had a place to sit, and proceeded to nod at my tiny manual wheelchair. She told me I didn't need the table, and that I should get up and leave so that her and her family would have a place to sit. Apparently I'm supposed to eat in my wheelchair with no table surface and super messy food. I'm not kidding. Costco has some of the messiest pizza you can eat. Pizza grease gets everywhere when you eat it. The woman stood there staring at me like she fully expected me to grab my wheels and roll away. But I had no desire to leave the table that I had found first. And on top of that, I really didn't particularly want to sit next to her screaming toddler. It was just a weird experience. I wouldn't have minded sharing my table if they asked me nicely. It would have been awkward and uncomfortable as hell. Who wants to sit with a bunch of uninvited strangers? I then had a brilliant idea. One thing that I buy as a female in bulk at Costco is feminine hygiene products. So I just smiled at this woman who fully expected me to move. I lifted my gigantic box of feminine hygiene products out of my shopping cart and plopped them up on my half of the table. They took up a good half of the picnic table because it was a big bulky box of them. But they were very clearly marked. There was no mistaking what that box was full of. I smiled at the woman and I told her she could absolutely sit at my table with me. Her little girl read the box label and asked her mom what pads are for. Well, let's just say that was the end of that entitled woman. The woman gasped in horror and quickly ushered her little girl away from me. The girl was far too young to know what pads were used for yet. Clearly they couldn't sit next to a devil like me. I got to enjoy my unanticipated low blood sugar in peace. Normally low blood sugar makes me feel like absolute crap, but this time I felt quite pleased. Nobody should have to eat in their wheelchair. Handicapped people have a right to use the table too. Thank you for watching. I would really appreciate it if you could like the video and subscribe to our channel if you haven't already. We'll see you again tomorrow.